Hello, everyone. This is the DraftKings Daily Trot. I am your host, Russell Clay. You can find me on Twitter at Russell J. Clay. I'm riding solo again, as I mentioned on the Pitcher Pod. My buddy Jason we don't know where he is. I believe he's in Arizona, but I can't confirm. So, getting into it. We got a 7-game slate here, starting at 7 o'clock. And it's pretty intriguing from a hitter standpoint because as we went through with the pitching, pretty cheap. I think there's some cheap options. I'm not saying, but I'm just saying if you throw a Marcus Stroman, Adam Wainwright combo in there for DK, that's 4,800 left per position. So that's quite intriguing to me. Not saying you should do it, but I'm probably going to be doing it, and I think it's super fun. Either way, you're probably not going to get that much cap in a normal lineup. I mean, you're probably going to be throwing in Geo, especially in cash. But keeping that in mind, I think you can fit that 3 to 4K range pretty much everywhere tonight, and then maybe find one or two punts as lineups come out and figure it out from there. But I mean, should be able to get some pretty pricey bats and pretty nice stacks in there today, especially against some weak pitching. So that's always good. Let's jump into it. Catcher here. Jonathan Lucroy obviously stands out at 5K, 1,000 more than second place. Second priced Wilson Ramos at 4K. I don't hate this. I think in terms of Cologne, as we talked about, or as I talked about, the royal we. Um, Lucroy is in a good spot tonight against Cologne. Cologne has sort of disintegrated as the season has gone on and kind of getting beat up in tougher matchups. So I like this Brewers team tonight. I like them as a stack. They're a little more expensive than you'd like, but I think they're reasonable to go to. And at 5K, I think that's going to scare a lot of people away at catcher because most nights you don't really want to pay up at catcher. So Lucroy probably going to be 15 to 20% owned in tournaments, but I think he has super high upside, and I think he's a reasonable option in cash as well. Jumping down here, Ramos is solid. I don't like him quite as much as Lucroy, but I'm okay with him as sort of a tournament guy. And if he fits in your cash lineup or you do a national stack, that's totally acceptable as well. But if I'm in that range, I'd just rather pay down to McCann. He's 500 less, in a good spot against Ulysse Chassin. So I think that's a pretty decent spot for him, lefty on righty. Going down here, I like Stroman, so Wieters, if he's in the lineup, not really someone I'm looking at a ton because I'm going to have a lot of Stroman cheap shares, at least in tournaments. And I think in terms of that matchup, I don't love it for Wieters, even though he has turned it around of late. Yadier Molina against Brandon Finnegan. Finnegan hasn't been great of late, so I think he's an interesting target for sure. And as you go down here, I think it just makes you want to pay up more. I think tonight's the night you can pay up at catcher and feel pretty comfortable at it. I mean, Austin Romine, obviously, McCann's at catcher, but if they switch something up, he's an interesting punt. You kind of go down the line here. I mean, Kurt Suzuki's always cheap, but not in a perfect matchup, in my opinion. Chris Iannetta, if he's in there, I'm not afraid to throw him out there, especially in a stack as sort of a contrarian, not a guy you necessarily think about. Super cheap, 2,200, and obviously coming off a 2-home run night last night, that might bump his ownership up a little bit. But I'm not afraid of Tomlin. He's really struggled in terms of getting upside, and that Seattle offense is top 5 in WOBA since 2015 and ISO. So I think there's a good chance he gets beat up here, and that could increase the potential of Iannetta. So if he's in the lineup, definitely look at him, give him a strong look. Other than that, I think that's kind of how you play it. You either pay up or into that Lucroy, Ramos, McCann range, or you look at maybe paying all the way down. But yeah, I think you'd reasonably be able to get into those top 3 tonight. Moving over to first, who to like here at the top? I think you obviously have to like Edwin Encarnacion against Wilson. I think the power's there, reasonably priced for the matchup. Toronto's expected for 5 runs tonight. Encarnacion obviously has strong power splits against righties. 4,600 is doable. Again, I like this Toronto team in one-off scenarios over sort of the full stack sometimes. So if you go Encarnacion, you could do it as a standalone and not necessarily a stacking option. Chris Carter, I think he has decent home run upside tonight. Obviously, he's been mashing the ball this year, and against Cologne, I think that's a weaker bat, a weaker arm to sort of go at. And you sort of look at Lucroy. I mean, I really like this Brewers stack tonight. Matt Adams again, 3,700. Obviously, hit the homer last night. Looking pretty solid here, guys. He's been pretty consistently getting hits. Nine hits in his last 10 games. In terms of hitting streak, he has 3 multi-hit games in a row. So I think we're looking at him as another guy in a solid matchup against Finnegan and that weak Reds bullpen. So that's someone I'm looking at there. He kind of takes a lot of the mid-range out here. Obviously, Mike Napoli's been crushing it, but he doesn't have that easy of a matchup against Carnes. So I think you're kind of avoiding that one. Justin Bohr against Irvin Santana. Santana's been getting beat up lately. Bohr, obviously, lefty versus righty. You got to like that. He's been pretty solid of late, kind of one of the guys holding this Marlins team together, even though they haven't been that great. He's only 3,400, so he does have the home run upside that I think you're looking for at that price. And then, I mean, if you go lower, it's rough down there lower. I mean, Clint Robinson's been getting some run there at 3K. But overall, I mean, I think there's a lot of upside up top here in terms of Chris Carter and Encarnacion and maybe even an Albert Pujols at 4,700 against Nova. I think that has some decent upside there for Pujols. Other than that, I mean, Chris Davis always has home run upside, but again, I think I kind of like Stroman tonight. So 4K, I mean, maybe you make a Baltimore stack, which is fine. It's pretty reasonable tonight, so that's fine with me. But other than that, I don't know about Votto. That's a hefty price for sort of what he's done this year. Obviously, he's been streaking the last few games, but that's a tough price for me to pay for him. Beyond that, I think those are kind of the options there. Okay, so getting back to, all right, we're going to second here. Daniel Murphy, obviously on a bit of a slide of late, but I think the Nationals have run into a string of solid matchups here against the White Sox, Miguel Gonzalez. That's a great matchup for him. Gonzalez hasn't been great this year. Righty on lefty. 5,300 is expensive, but I think you can go right back to that National stack that put up a big number yesterday. Obviously, it wasn't the whole 1 through 5 doing all the damage, but I think that's pretty reasonable for them to have a good output again today. Obviously not what they did yesterday, but in terms of the lefty on righty matchup for that lineup, I think you're really looking at him, Harper, and Revere again, and obviously Worth always in play. So I think that's kind of what you're looking at there as a top option. Again, for Tomlin, this is a tough matchup for him. Cano more of a tournament only play, but he does have a decent matchup. Solid Woba and ISO against righties, and Tomlin's kind of coming in at home or on the road against this Mariners lineup. That's a tough task for him. So Mariners lefties tonight are actually pretty intriguing. Um, Neil Walker against Jimmy Nelson, not someone I'm really looking at. Um, the Mets are in kind of rough shape right now. Neil Walker is a solid bat, but I think you just wait for another day and sort of either pay up for Murphy or sort of look at a Cano in that range in terms of tournaments. Moving down a little bit, Derek Dietrich, 3,800. I do like this Marlins sort of lineup tonight, not necessarily as a stack, but I do think they have some solid upside against Irvin Santana. He has shown a le- uh, he has shown the ability to blow up this year. So that's all I'll say on that. But Dietrich, solid value as always, 3,800, getting a little pricier than he was earlier in the year, but I think you can go with that and feel good about it. If you're moving down again, I think Kipnis is a pretty decent value. I like this Cleveland Indians team tonight, and he kind of takes a lot of the lower priced guys out of play because you like that price for Kipnis. Carnes is a solid arm, but things aren't perfect in terms of that matchup tonight. Obviously, the Indians top 10 in both WOBA and WRC plus in 2016, so against righties. So you're not really feeling that great about Carnes tonight. And if you are going to target him, I think Kipnis is one way to do it. So that's definitely what I'm looking at there. I'm not saying he takes Starlin Castro out of play, but that's tough for Castro to sort of manage there. Obviously, he had back-to-back homers a few days ago, but that's not something you can get used to. He is a solid option again, but I do like Kipnis over him. So that's kind of what you're looking at there. Um, in terms of moving down here, it's kind of rough. Depending on what Toronto does, Darwin Barney and Ryan Goins, um, 2,800 and 2,700. If one of them is thrown in the lineup, they're a nice punt, and that's something you can definitely look at doing there, especially if you need a cheap Toronto fifth guy or something like that. I think that's a solid option. And then Colton Wong against Finnegan, probably going to be batting a little later in the lineup, but he could get a few hits. He could get a few hits in that game, and then you never know what happens when they get to that bullpen. So decent upside there for sure. And again, one more guy, Giovatella, 3,100 against Nova. Nova's really struggled the last few starts, so I think not necessarily in a Angel stack, but I think he's a fine standalone play as a tournament guy. So that's kind of what you're looking at there. Other than that, I mean, that's pretty straightforward on what you're doing there. So on to third. Matt Carpenter. I mean, obviously he hasn't done what he usually does this year, but I think that's another great matchup for him. 4,900 is expensive, but I think he's a borderline cash play at that price if you can fit him in, which I think should be pretty reasonable tonight with some of the higher end options. Two guys at the top here I'm not totally in on. Eduardo Nunez, 5,200. Todd Frazier, 48. I would just rather go to Carpenter or Donaldson in this spot. Frazier has sort of a tough matchup against Gio Gonzalez. The White Sox have struggled against lefties this year, and I don't think Frazier has been much different other than the home run power. So I'm kind of fading those guys unless it's a tournament, but even in a tournament, I'd rather just go Carpenter, Donaldson. In a different vein here, Anthony Rendon, he's obviously in play for the Nationals in a stack. I'm not necessarily in on him as a standalone guy. I think you just go with Murphy or Harper to get the best out of sort of the one-offs in that matchup. But as a stack, sure, if you want to go up to him, it makes it a little more expensive with him, Murphy, Worth, and Rendon, but and Harper, but I think you can manage that quite well. Kyle Seager, another lefty against Tomlin. He's obviously been pretty strong this year in terms of home run potential. So I think there's some decent upside there in terms of home runs. Moving down here, Martin Prado against Santana. Again, I think we're looking at the Marlins here. He's a solid option. Good matchup there against Santana. So 3,500. I'm kind of looking at him as sort of a cheaper move down if you can't afford one of the top options there. And Trevor Plouffe, he's actually pretty reasonably priced. I'm okay with him there. I'm just not in on all the high priced Minnesota bats. So 3,200, that's reasonable to throw out there. I'm just not sold on that 5 projected run total for the Twins tonight. So I'm a little suspicious of that, but at the same time, Trevor Plouffe, 3,200, obviously coming off a homer last night and a few hits in the most recent games. So good splits tonight. I'd go with him as a pretty reasonable option in the mid range. And moving down here, the guy we're kind of looking at, Hernan Perez, 2,600 against Cologne. That's a great value, especially in a Milwaukee stack and even as a standalone. That's kind of what you're looking at there. Oh, excuse me. Just a reasonable price for a guy that's hitting well and in a stacked lineup that should do well tonight. So should get plenty of opportunity and should provide some decent upside for where he's hitting in the lineup. I mean, if Villar Braun and Lucroy get going, Hernan's going to be right in the mix of that. So that's a great play at 2,600. I don't see how you can really get away from that unless you totally pay up. So you're looking at Carpenter, Donaldson, and then probably paying down quite a bit for Hernan. I love Hernan in that spot tonight. All right. Whew. Shortstop tonight, guys. What are we looking at here? Eduardo Nunez. This is another guy. Sort of same thing as with third. You're not really liking that price that much. 5,200. That is super expensive. For a guy that's been solid this year and has obviously shown major upside the last 4 games or so, but that's not really what he's been this year. He's not really a 20-plus fantasy point guy per game. Obviously, no one is per game, but I mean that he doesn't normally have that upside. So against Kohler, I don't think this is actually as perfect of a matchup as it is perceived to be. I'm fading tonight, so that's enough on that. Jonathan Villar, again, I love this Brewers stack against Cologne. Kind of coming for you, Cologne. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at there. If you're paying up, I'd rather just go to him. Machado always in play. Probably more of a tournament guy tonight. I don't necessarily love the Orioles stack, so you can always play Machado. Always, no matter what. But I'd probably stick to tournaments tonight. Jumping down, Lindor, Aledmus Diaz, again, in solid matchups. I'm looking at those guys. Cozart, probably taking the night off from just because I think Wainwright has actually stabilized a little bit and has provides a little more upside from pitching in terms of the slate instead of the Reds batters. So I'm probably avoiding that altogether. Gregorio Pettit, 3,500. They're bumping up his price, unfortunately. Hit a homer last night, 4 games above 12, 10 DK points, and then 5 out of the last 6. So he's been streaking a bunch of multi-hit games recently and has a pretty easy matchup against Devon Nova tonight. So again, I think you're looking there. I think that's a great option even at 3,500. He's been crushing the ball. And he's an interesting way to get exposure to that Angels lineup tonight. So I think you can get weird with that stack and sort of spread it all over the lineup. I don't necessarily think you have to go 1 through 4 or something like that. Pettit's been batting at the end of the lineup, but he's been awesome. So I think we go with him again tonight and see what happens. Going lower, I don't really see much of a need to go lower than Pettit because obviously the pitching on the slate is cheap, and I mean Pettit's been so good. Uh, Asdrubal Cabrera against Nelson is a fine option, but not better than Pettit by any means. And in terms of anyone else, I mean, I'm not really digging it. So you can dive lower. Obviously, there's going to be guys every night who pop out of nowhere. Potentially for the min, we'll see. We'll see what Seattle does with that lineup. Maybe you get Sardinas in there and throw him in for the min. But other than that, I think we're kind of looking up here. Outfield, gotta love Trout against Nova, of course. 5,500 though, so that's super pricey. You might be able to fit him in an Angel stack. Standalone would be tough though, 5,500. Unless you can pay down for a Pettit and then figure something out there. But yeah, 5,500 expensive but worth it for tonight for sure. Kind of a bummer to see Stephen Piscotty that high up there, 4,800. You gotta like the Cardinals tonight against Finnegan, but that's price considered. That's a little much for me. I'd rather go with Carpenter in the Cardinals lineup for the similar range price. And if you're stacking, you got to like Piscotty tonight, but that is expensive. So it kind of limits your upside with the rest of your roster construction. So that's kind of a bummer. I mean, I could see a lineup where you kind of get weird, fade Piscotty, and go with the 1 through 3, and then maybe throw a later bat in the Cardinals lineup out there, something like that. Because I like Bryce Harper over him in that range. I like Bryce Harper quite a bit over pretty much everyone in that range tonight. It just, the matchup's good. I think the Nationals are starting to get it going, so you can't totally pitch around Harper anymore. He's starting to turn it around. He was in the low 240s for most of the season. He's getting up there 260, and obviously 2 3-hit games in his last 3. He's just starting to hit the ball and not get walked every game. So starting to get into a rhythm here. I think this is another night to target him, just like last night. Braun in that same range. They're about the same to me, but I still prefer Harper at that price. Going down a little bit, Jose Bautista, 4,400. That's intriguing to me as a one-off. I think you can fit that in. And yeah, I think it's a great one-off. And if you're throwing the stack in there, that's a pretty reasonable price. So 1 through 3 stack always in play for Toronto. But again, one-offs are just as good. Nelson Cruz, I'm probably not touching tonight. It's not a perfect matchup for him. The lefties are the ones that have done the damage versus righties this year. So Cruz, not a perfect play tonight. Always in play, but more just a tournament guide tonight. Obviously, we mentioned Cardinals, Matt Holliday, 4,400, always in play. Jacoby Ellsbury versus Chacin, solid matchup. So you kind of look at that at 4,200. I mean, there's a lot of solid options tonight. You look at Brett Gardner again, 4K, same spot as Ellsbury from the other side of the plate there. And then we get down Stanton. What do we do with him right now? I don't trust it, guys. I still don't trust it. He did get 2 hits last night and an RBI, so that's 8 fantasy points. But you're more looking at him on FanDuel than DraftKings, unfortunately. So I'm not really buying this. His price is still 4K. He's still going to be high owned just because he's cheaper than normal. So I'm not really buying this still until he hits a homer or shows some power. Beyond singles, I don't really trust it. He's still striking out every game. It still smells, guys. I'm not touching it. I'd rather go with other Marlins in that lineup than risk on a guy who's just not right now. So that's kind of the way I'm playing that. No White Sox versus Gio tonight, especially Melky, the lefty there. I don't like that matchup whatsoever. Has me and Jason joke. Byron strikeout Buxton, striking out every game. Would have upside when he was 2,400, 2,500, 2,300, but at 36, I mean, I just don't like the way the Twins batters are priced up tonight. I'm not. You can always throw in Minnesota tournament lineups, but I'm definitely not in on them in cash, and I'm definitely not touching them from a one-off perspective in terms of upside. I don't see it tonight. So when Kohler gets shelled, I guess I'll be wrong, but I don't see Kohler getting completely shelled by this Twins lineup. Ben Revere 3,400 pretty much takes that whole range with Worth. I mean, that's a great stacking price. You can just fit those guys in with Murphy and Harper, and it's just super cheap. Obviously, that takes out your whole outfield, but I think that's totally worth it. You can fit in a Pettit, and sort of make that whole lineup work with some reasonable pitching. So that's a great spot, and it pretty much takes that whole group out of play for me. The whole 36 to 32 range. Other than that, I mean, that's pretty much who I'm looking at for upside there with Worth and Revere. So that's what we're dealing with there. Rajai Davis, always worth a punt, I think, at this stage. Shown some upside. Hit a homer the other day. Obviously not going to get that every day, but lead off 3,100. Carnes might get beat up by this Indians lineup, so that's what I'm looking at there. I like that quite a bit. Adam Eaton out of play. Gio Gonzalez lefty on lefty. Not touching that. Again, you don't want to go with Franklin Gutierrez necessarily, even though he's cheap. Tomlin is a strong arm, so you want to go with the strong bats in Seattle's lineup, not necessarily target the sort of surrounding pieces. So Ichiro, always in play if he's in the lineup. He's just been awesome this year as a punt guy. He seems to come through pretty much every time. I mean, 2 and 3 hits the last 2 times out against the Twins, and batting 330 on the year. Hasn't been priced over 3K this year. 2,700. I mean, that's automatic if he's in the lineup. And other than that, I mean, that's a solid pay down. So if you can do that, that's kind of the look I'm getting there. He's been batting leadoff quite a bit lately. 2,700. Give me that every time, potentially in cash, if he is batting leadoff. So that's what I'm looking at there, guys. Thanks for tuning in. As always, check out Daily Fantasy Cafe for all our awesome and wonderful tools and content.